The Wyoming sun blazed down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Coyote Ridge, a town that seemed to have sprung from the very dirt it sat upon. It was August 1878, and the air hung thick with the scent of horse manure, whiskey, and the acrid bite of gunpowder that never quite left these frontier settlements. Clara May Thornton pressed herself against the rough wooden wall of her father's shack, trying to make herself invisible as angry voices carried through the thin planks. $20 ain't enough, Thornton. The voice belonged to Big Jack Sullivan, owner of the Broken Wheel Saloon and a man whose reputation for cruelty preceded him like a bad smell. You owe me 40, plus interest. That pretty little daughter of yours ought to cover the difference. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was 19, old enough to know exactly what Sullivan meant, and young enough to still believe there might be some escape from this nightmare. Her father, Ezra Thornton, had worked the copper mines until his lungs gave out. Now he spent his days drowning his failures in whiskey and cards, each bet digging their grave a little deeper. She's a good girl, Jack, Ezra wheezed, though Clara could hear the weakness in his protest. Knows her letters, can cook and sew. She'd make you a fine wife. Wife? Sullivan's laugh was like gravel in a tin cup. I got no use for a wife, but a pretty young thing to serve drinks and entertain my customers, that's worth something. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the small bundle containing her few possessions, her mother's Bible, a silver hairbrush, and the old Colt revolver she'd found after her mother died. Though she only had 3 bullets and had never fired it, she'd known this day would come. Her father had been eyeing her differently lately, the way a man eyes a horse he's planning to sell. Through a crack in the wall, she could see them now. Sullivan stood massive and imposing, his belly straining against a stained vest, while her father seemed to shrink beside him, a shadow of the man who'd once swung a pickaxe 12 hours a day. Behind Sullivan, 2 of his men lounged against the porch rail, hands resting casually on their pistols. I need another day, Ezra begged. Just one more day. There's a big game tomorrow night. Sullivan's meaty hands shot out, grabbing Ezra by the throat. You've had plenty of days. The girl comes with me now, or I put a bullet in you and take her anyway. Clara knew she had to run, but where the desert stretched endlessly in every direction, and a woman alone wouldn't last a day. Still, better to die free than live as Sullivan's property. She was edging toward the back door when the sound of approaching hoofbeats made everyone freeze. A lone rider appeared at the end of the street, moving with the unhurried confidence of a man who'd never met a situation he couldn't handle. As he drew closer, Clara could make out details tall in the saddle, broad shoulders beneath a dust-covered duster, face shadowed by a weathered Stetson. His horse was a magnificent black stallion, the kind of animal that cost more than most folks saw in a lifetime. The stranger reined up near the confrontation, dismounting with fluid grace. When he pushed back his hat, Clara caught her breath. He wasn't handsome in the pretty way of the dandies who sometimes passed through town. This was a face carved by wind and sun, with sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of sage honey. A day's worth of stubble covered a strong jaw, and a thin scar ran from his left temple to his cheekbone. Afternoon, gentlemen, he said, his voice deep and measured. Seems like a lot of commotion for such a hot day. Sullivan released Ezra, who stumbled back, gasping. None of your business. Stranger, move along. But the man didn't move. Instead, he studied the scene with those unusual eyes, taking in Ezra's cowering form and Sullivan's aggressive stance. Then his gaze found Clara through the gap in the wall, and she felt pinned by the intensity of it. Caleb Boone. He introduced himself, and Clara saw Sullivan's men exchange uneasy glances. The name carried weight in these parts. Boone owned one of the largest cattle ranches in the territory, and rumors said he'd made his fortune in ways that didn't bear close examination. I'm looking to hire some help for my ranch. Heard there might be folks in need of honest work. Like I said, this ain't your concern. Sullivan growled. but some of his bluster had faded. Caleb's hand moved to rest casually on his gun belt, the gesture relaxed but unmistakable. "See, that's where you're wrong. I make it my business to know what's happening in every town I pass through. Bad for commerce when folks get the idea they can just take what they want." The tension crackled like a lightning before a storm. Sullivan's men shifted nervously, clearly recognizing they were facing someone far more dangerous than their usual victims. Caleb Boone had the look of a man who'd killed before and would do so again without losing sleep. "The man owes me money," Sullivan said finally. "It's a legitimate debt." "How much?" $40. Caleb reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. He counted out the money with deliberate slowness, then held it out. $40, plus 10 for your trouble. The debt's paid." Sullivan's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "What's your interest in this?" "Like I said, I need help at my ranch." Caleb's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. "I'm prepared to offer fair wages and respectable work, unless you'd prefer to pursue this matter further." It wasn't really a question. Sullivan might have been a big fish in the small pond of Coyote Ridge, but he wasn't stupid enough to cross someone like Caleb Boone. He snatched the money and jerked his head at his men. "This ain't over, Thornton," he spat as he walked away. "You better hope your new friend stays interested." After they'd gone, Caleb turned to Ezra. "You have a daughter?" Ezra nodded eagerly, seeing a chance for profit. "Clara May, good girl, strong. She can cook, clean, tend animals." "I'll speak to her myself." Caleb's tone cut off Ezra's sales pitch. "If she's interested in honest employment." Clara stepped out from behind the shack, chin raised despite her fear. If this man thought he'd bought her along with her father's debt, he'd learned different. She'd use those 3 bullets if she had to. "Mr. Boone," she said, proud that her voice didn't shake. "I thank you for your intervention, but I'm not looking for employment." He studied her for a long moment, and Clara felt like he could see straight through her brave facade to the terrified girl beneath. She was a mess, she knew. Her dress was patched and faded, her dark hair pulled back in a simple braid, her hands rough from endless chores, but she stood straight and met his gaze. "That's your choice, miss," he said finally. "But consider this: your father's debt is paid today. What about tomorrow? And Sullivan won't forget this embarrassment. You'll need protection, whether you want it or not." "And you're offering that protection out of Christian charity?" Clara couldn't keep the bitter edge from her voice. She'd learned young that men didn't give something for nothing. A slight smile tugged at Caleb's lips. "I'm no saint, Miss Thornton, but I run an honest operation. Room, board, fair wages, and you'd be working alongside my housekeeper, Mrs. Rodriguez. She's 60 years old and mean as a rattlesnake. Nobody bothers her girls." "Clara, don't be foolish," Ezra interjected. "Mister, Boone's offering you a respectable position." "Respectable?" Clara whirled on her father, years of suppressed anger finally boiling over. "Like it was respectable when you tried to sell me to pay your gambling debts, when you drank away everything Mother left us?" Ezra's face flushed. "You ungrateful little—" He raised his hand, but Caleb caught his wrist. "I wouldn't," he said quietly, and Ezra paled at whatever he saw in the younger man's eyes. Clara felt tears threaten but refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of these men. I'll take your offer, Mr. Boone," she said. "But I work for wages, nothing more, and I leave when I choose." "Fair enough." Caleb released Ezra's wrist and moved back to his horse. "Get your things. We've got 4 hours of daylight left." Clara didn't have much to gather. Within minutes, she'd stuffed her few possessions into a canvas sack. Ezra watched from the doorway, his expression cycling between resentment and shame. "You could thank me," he said as she emerged. "I could have let Sullivan take you months ago." Clara looked at the man who'd sired her but never been a father. "Goodbye, Ezra," she said simply. using his given name for the first time. He wasn't her father anymore. Maybe he never had been. Caleb had procured a gentle mare from the livery stable, and he helped Clara mount with impersonal courtesy. As they rode out of Coyote Ridge, Clara didn't look back. Behind them, a dust devil whirled down the empty street, scattering tumbleweeds and debris. The desert wind was picking up, and dark clouds massed on the horizon. "Storm coming," Caleb observed, urging his stallion to a faster pace. Clara gripped the saddle horn, unused to riding. "I've survived storms before." He glanced at her, and she thought she saw approval in his eyes. "I believe you have, Miss Thornton, but this one might be different." They rode in silence as the town disappeared behind them, swallowed by the vastness of the Wyoming territory. Clara had no idea what awaited her at Caleb Boone's ranch, but it had to be better than what she'd left behind. She'd traded one uncertain future for another, but at least this time, it was her choice. The wind grew stronger, whipping her hair free from its braid. Lightning flickered in the approaching clouds, and the air tasted of copper and rain. Clara had lived in the desert all her life, and she knew how quickly these summer storms could turn deadly. "We need shelter," Caleb said, scanning the horizon. "There's a line shack about 2 miles north. We can wait it out there." They pushed the horses harder, racing against the storm. Clara's mare struggled to keep pace with Caleb's stallion, but she held on grimly. The first fat raindrops were falling when they spotted the small wooden structure tucked against a rocky outcropping. Caleb dismounted quickly, leading both horses into the crude lean-to attached to the shack. Clara slid from the saddle on unsteady legs, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Inside," he ordered, grabbing saddlebags and her small bundle. The shack was basic but clean, a single room with a pot-bellied stove, a narrow cot, and shelves stocked with canned goods. Caleb lit a lantern as the storm broke in earnest, rain hammering the roof like bullets. "You'll take the cot," he said, spreading his bedroll on the floor. "We'll move on when this passes." Clara perched nervously on the edge of the cot, acutely aware of being alone with a stranger. Caleb seemed to sense her fear. He settled by the stove, pulling out makings for coffee. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Thornton," he said conversationally. "What skills do you have besides standing up to bullies?" Despite everything, Clara felt a small smile tug at her lips. "My mother taught me letters and numbers. I can read and write better than most. I kept the accounts for the boarding house before she died." "Useful skills," he acknowledged. "My foreman's been complaining about the bookkeeping. Maybe we can put you to better use than just kitchen work." They talked as the storm raged, and gradually Clara's fear eased. Caleb Boone was not what she'd expected. He treated her with a distant courtesy that was almost confusing. Men in her experience wanted something from women, their bodies, their labor, their submission, but Caleb seemed to want nothing more than efficient help running his ranch. As night fell and the storm showed no signs of abating, Clara finally asked the question that had been nagging at her. "Why did you really pay my father's debt?" Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "I've seen what men like Sullivan do to girls like you. Figured $50 was a small price to prevent that. But you don't know me. I'm nobody." He looked at her then, and something flickered in those sage-colored eyes. "Nobody's nobody, Miss Thornton. Everyone deserves a chance to be more than their circumstances." It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in years, and Clara had to turn away to hide the tears that finally spilled over. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the little shack, she felt safer than she had in a very long time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She'd have to prove herself at the ranch, establish her place, learn to navigate whatever complex dynamics existed there. But tonight, with the storm raging and a stranger's unexpected kindness warming her more than the stove, Clara May Thornton began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could build a life that was truly her own. The wind howled like a living thing, and lightning illuminated the desert in stark, momentary brilliance. It was a wild night in a wild land, and Clara had taken her first step into a future as uncertain and vast as the frontier itself. The morning sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and rust as Clara got her first proper look at the Double B Ranch. After the storm had passed, they'd ridden through the night, and now, as they crested a low hill, the sprawling property spread before them like something from a dream. The main house stood proud against the backdrop of distant mountains, a two-story structure of timber and stone that seemed to have grown from the earth itself. Unlike the ramshackle buildings of Coyote Ridge, this home spoke of permanence, of roots sunk deep into the unforgiving soil. Corrals and outbuildings dotted the property, and, in the distance, Clara could see cattle grazing on sparse grassland. "Welcome to the Double B," Caleb said, his voice carrying a note of quiet pride. As they rode closer, Clara noticed the small details that marked this as a working ranch: the well-maintained fences, the organized layout of the buildings, the sense of purposeful activity even in the early morning hour. Several cowboys were already at work, and they paused to watch their bosses approach with a strange woman. An older Mexican woman emerged from the main house, wiping her hands on her apron. Her gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her weathered face wore an expression of skeptical assessment. This had to be Mrs. Rodriguez, the housekeeper Caleb had mentioned. "Senor Caleb," she called out, her accent thick but her English clear. "You bring home strays again." "This is Miss Clara Thornton, Rosa." Caleb dismounted and helped Clara down from her mare. "She'll be helping with the household accounts and whatever else you need. Miss Thornton, Mrs. Rosa Rodriguez runs this house with an iron fist. You'll do well to follow her lead." Rosa's dark eyes swept over Clara, taking in every detail from her worn dress to her determined chin. "Another lost lamb," she muttered, but not unkindly. "Come, Nina, you look ready to fall over. When did you last eat?" Clara tried to remember. "Yesterday morning, ma'am." Dios mio, Rosa threw up her hands. "Men, they think only of horses and cattle, never that people need food. Come, come." Before Clara could protest, she found herself swept into the house and deposited at a large kitchen table. The interior was simple but clean, with whitewashed walls and floors of polished wood. It smelled of coffee and fresh bread, and Clara's stomach cramped with hunger. Rosa bustled about, soon setting before Clara a plate loaded with eggs, bacon, biscuits, and preserves. "Eat," she commanded. "All of it. You're too skinny." As Clara ate, trying not to wolf down the best meal she'd had in months, Rosa peppered her with questions. Where was she from? Could she really read and write? Did she know how to work hard? Or was she one of those delicate town girls who fainted at the sight of blood? "I can work," Clara assured her between bites. "My mother ran a boarding house before she died. I know how to cook, clean, do laundry, tend a garden." "Good, good." Rosa nodded approvingly. "But here is different. Ranch life is hard. The men are rough, though Senor Caleb keeps them in line. You stay away from the bunkhouse. See any cowboy bothers you, you come to me or Senor Caleb immediately." Clara nodded, relief washing over her. This stern woman would be her protection, her guide in this new world. "Now," Rosa continued, "your room is small but private. You'll help me with the house in the mornings. Then Senor Caleb says you'll work on the account books in the afternoon. Can you really do numbers?" "Yes, ma'am. My mother taught me, and I kept the books for her boarding house." "We shall see." Rosa's tone was skeptical but not unkind. "Come, I show you where you sleep." The room was indeed small, tucked under the eaves on the second floor. But to Clara it was paradise. A narrow bed with a real mattress, a small dresser, a washstand with pitcher and bowl, and, luxury of luxuries, a window that looked out over the vast prairie. after sharing a cramped space with her father. Having her own room felt like unimaginable wealth. "You wash, change clothes," Rosa instructed. "I'll find you something better to wear. That dress is only good for rags now." Left alone, Clara sank onto the bed, overwhelmed. 24 hours ago, she'd been facing a fate worse than death. Now she had a job, a room, and people who seemed to expect nothing from her but honest work. It felt too good to be true. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Rosa entered with an armload of clothing. "These belong to—" She paused, her expression tightening. "They are not used now. Should fit you close enough." The clothes were simple but well-made 2 work dresses, a riding skirt, several blouses, and undergarments that were practically new. Clara fingered the fabric, wondering about their previous owner. But Rosa had already bustled out. Once cleaned and changed, Clara felt almost like a different person. The blue calico dress fit reasonably well, and with her hair freshly braided and her face washed, she could almost pretend she belonged here. The morning flew by as Rosa introduced her to the rhythm of ranch life. There was bread to bake, meals to prepare for the ranch hands, cleaning that never seemed to end. But Rosa was a patient teacher, and Clara threw herself into the work with grateful determination. "You're not afraid of hard work," Rosa observed as Clara scrubbed the kitchen floor. "Good. Senor Caleb has no use for lazy people." "How long have you worked here?" Clara asked, pausing to wipe sweat from her forehead. 6 years, since—" Rosa's face clouded. "Since he needed help. He is a good man, Senor Caleb, but carries much sadness. You be respectful, work hard, cause no trouble." Clara wanted to ask about the sadness, about the clothes that fit her so well, but Rosa's closed expression discouraged questions. Instead, she returned to scrubbing, storing her curiosity for later. After the midday meal, where Clara ate in the kitchen with Rosa while the hands ate in the cookhouse, Caleb appeared in the doorway. He'd changed from his travel clothes into work attire, but he still carried himself with that quiet authority that made men step aside. "Miss Thornton, if you're ready, I'll show you the office." The office was attached to the main house, a masculine space that smelled of leather and tobacco. Papers covered a large desk in barely controlled chaos, and ledgers were stacked haphazardly on shelves. "As you can see," Caleb said dryly, "bookkeeping isn't my strong suit. My foreman, Jake, tries to keep track, but—" He gestured helplessly at the mess. Clara approached the desk, examining the papers. Her fingers itched to organize, to bring order to the chaos. "I can fix this," she said with quiet confidence. "But I'll need to understand your system first. Cattle sales, supply purchases, payroll. All of it." He showed her where the various ledgers were kept, explaining the basics of the ranch's operations. Clara listened intently, asking intelligent questions that seemed to surprise him. "You really do understand numbers," he said, almost wonderingly. "I told you I did." Clara couldn't keep a note of pride from her voice. "My mother said figures never lie, only the people using them." Smart woman. Caleb moved to the window, gazing out at his land. "Take your time getting familiar with everything. If you have questions, ask me or Jake. Some of the older records might be difficult to understand." Clara sensed another story there, but didn't press. Instead, she settled at the desk, running her hands over the smooth wood. "I'll have this sorted in a few days." "I believe you will." He turned to leave, then paused. "Miss Thornton, Clara, you're free to go where you like on the property, but stay clear of the north pasture. We've had some wolf trouble, and I've got men watching for them." "I understand." After he left, Clara immersed herself in the papers, slowly. A picture emerged of the Double B's operations. It was a substantial spread, running several thousand head of cattle, with contracts to supply beef to the army and the railroad. But the books were indeed a mess, with gaps in the records that suggested Caleb's attention had wandered for a significant period. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice the passage of time until Rosa called her for supper. The older woman smiled approvingly at the neat stacks of papers Clara had created. "You work like one possessed," Rosa observed. "Bueno. Senor Caleb needs help. He tries to do too much alone." That evening, Clara ate with Rosa in the kitchen again while Caleb took his meal in the dining room. Through the doorway, she could see him reading, a glass of whiskey at his elbow. He looked solitary, she thought, like a man who'd forgotten how to share space with others. "Does he always eat alone?" she asked Rosa. "See, since—" Rosa crossed herself. "It's better not to speak of sad things. You go rest now. Tomorrow is another long day." But Clara couldn't rest. Her small room felt too confining after the events of the past days. She slipped out onto the porch, breathing in the cool night air. The stars spread above her in a glittering canopy, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. "Can't sleep." She jumped, hand flying to her chest. Caleb stood in the shadows, almost invisible until he moved into the moonlight. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to disturb." "You didn't." He leaned against the porch rail, rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "First night in a new place is always hard." "It's so quiet," Clara admitted. "In town, there was always noise, shouting, music from the saloons, fighting." "You'll get used to it. The quiet can be good for thinking, or for not thinking, depending on what you need." They stood in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds. Finally, Clara gathered her courage. "Mr. Boone, can I ask you something?" "Caleb," he corrected. "And yes." "Why did you really hire me? You could have found experienced help, someone who knows ranch work." He was quiet for a long moment, the glow of his cigarette a small point of light in the darkness. "You stood up to your father and Sullivan. Didn't cry, didn't beg, just faced what was coming with your chin up. That takes a kind of courage that's rare out here." "I was terrified," Clara confessed. "Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done despite the fear." He stubbed out his cigarette. "Get some rest. Clara, tomorrow Rosa's going to teach you to ride properly, and she's a tougher teacher than any bronc." As he turned to go, Clara called softly, "Caleb, thank you for everything." He paused, silhouetted in the doorway. "You earn your keep. We'll call it square." But as Clara finally settled into her narrow bed, she knew it was more than that. Caleb Boone had given her more than a job. He'd given her a chance at a different life. The house creaked and settled around her, and somewhere a night bird called. It was indeed quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, free from the threat of violence or betrayal. For the first time in years, Clara fell asleep without fear of what tomorrow might bring. The Double B Ranch had taken her in, and while she didn't yet know what her place here would be, she was determined to prove worthy of the chance she'd been given. 3 weeks had passed since Clara's arrival at the Double B, and she'd settled into a routine that felt almost like belonging. The account books were now meticulously organized, and she'd discovered several errors in the ranch's favor that had saved Caleb considerable money. But it was during the quiet evening hours that the real stories of the ranch began to unfold. Clara was working late in the office, reconciling cattle sales, when she heard it, the sound of a child's laughter, faint but unmistakable. She froze, pen suspended over the ledger. The ranch had no children. She'd been here long enough to know that. The sound came again, drifting through the open window like a ghost. Clara rose, moving to peer out into the gathering dusk. The yard was empty, but Caleb stood near the corrals, his posture rigid as he stared at something she couldn't see. "You heard it too." Clara spun around. Rosa stood in the doorway, her weathered face creased with sorrow. "I don't understand," Clara said. "There are no children here." Rosa entered, closing the door behind her. "No, not anymore." She settled heavily into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 60 years. You wonder about the clothes I gave you, about why Senor Caleb eats alone, about the sadness in this house. Clara nodded, sinking back into her desk chair. She'd sensed the undercurrents of grief but hadn't dared ask. 3 years ago, Rosa began. This house was full of life. Senor Caleb had a wife, Elizabeth, Española, like me, but educated, refined. Her father was a don with lands in California, and they had a son, little Tommy, 4 years old, with his father's eyes and his mother's smile. Clara's throat tightened. She could already sense where this story led. Senor Caleb was in Denver on business. The Comanche had been quiet for months. Everyone thought the troubles were over. But a rogue band mixed with banditos. Rosa crossed herself. They came at dawn. Elizabeth tried to protect Tommy, tried to hide him, but they found them both. Dear God, Clara whispered. I was in town, getting supplies. When I returned, Rosa's voice broke. The house was burning, the cowboys were dead or scattered, and Elizabeth and Tommy... She couldn't continue. Clara reached out, grasping the older woman's hand. Now she understood the gaps in the ledgers, the solitary meals, the way Caleb sometimes stared at nothing with haunted eyes. Senor Caleb came home to ashes. Rosa continued after a moment. He went mad with grief. For months, he hunted the men who did it, found some of them. They say, what he did to them. She shuddered. When he finally came back, he was different, harder, quieter, built the house again, exactly as it was, but never speaks of them. The clothes I'm wearing, Clara said softly, they were Elizabeth's. See, I kept them, though he told me to burn everything. I think maybe I knew someone would need them someday, someone who might bring life back to this place. They sat in silence, the weight of the tragedy settling over them like a shroud. Outside, Clara could hear Caleb's boots on the porch, pacing restlessly. Why are you telling me this? Clara asked finally. Rosa studied her shrewdly. Because you need to understand. Senor Caleb saved you, yes, but he cannot save himself. He is a good man drowning in memories. Be careful, Nina. Do not let his darkness swallow your light. After Rosa left, Clara couldn't concentrate on the books. She kept thinking about a 4-year-old boy with sage-colored eyes, about a woman who died trying to protect her child. The tragedy explained so much. Caleb's distance, his kindness to her, even his choice to pay her father's debt. Perhaps saving her was his way of atoning for failing to save his own family. She found him exactly where she expected, standing by a small fenced area she'd noticed but never explored, set apart from the main cemetery where the cowboys were buried. 2 wooden crosses marked graves that were carefully tended, with wildflowers planted around them. Rosa told you. It wasn't a question. I'm sorry, Clara said. I didn't mean to pry. You would have heard eventually. Ranch gossip travels faster than wildfire. He didn't look at her, his eyes fixed on the smaller cross. Tommy would have been 7 now. He loved horses, fearless, even at 4. Used to follow me everywhere, chattering non-stop. Clara moved to stand beside him, not speaking. Sometimes grief needed witness more than words. Elizabeth tried to fight them, he continued, his voice rough. The neighbors found evidence that she wounded at least one before. He stopped, jaw clenched. She was brave, braver than I ever was. You couldn't have known. Couldn't I? He turned to her then, and the raw pain in his eyes made her step back. There had been raids, other ranches hit, but I thought we were safe. Thought my reputation would protect them. I was arrogant, and they paid the price. That's not true. Clara's voice came out stronger than she expected. Evil men did this. Not your absence, not your choices. Evil men who would have done it whether you were here or not. He stared at her, something shifting in his expression. You sound very certain. I am. Clara lifted her chin. My mother died of fever while my father was passed out drunk in a saloon. For months. I blamed him if he'd been sober, if he'd fetched the doctor sooner. But the truth is, people die. Bad things happen. We can't always stop them, no matter how much we love someone. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, he asked, How old were you? 15. Old enough to know better. Young enough to need her desperately. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. She made me promise to survive, to be more than what the world expected of a miner's daughter. Some days that promise was all that kept me going. Elizabeth made me promise too, Caleb said softly. To live, to not let vengeance consume me. I have kept half that promise. They stood together as full darkness fell. Two people bound by loss and the struggle to continue. Finally, Caleb stirred. I should apologize. This isn't appropriate, burdening you with old sorrows. You're not burdening me. Clara turned to face him. You gave me a chance when no one else would. The least I can do is listen when you need to speak of them. Something flickered across his face. Surprise, perhaps, or a recognition of kinship. You're not what I expected, Clara Thornton. What did you expect? A scared girl who'd run at the first hard day. Instead, he gestured vaguely. Instead, you organize my chaos, charm Rosa into actually smiling, and stand here offering comfort for wounds that should have nothing to do with you. Maybe they have everything to do with me, Clara said quietly. Maybe we're all walking wounded out here, just trying to find reasons to keep going. He studied her in the moonlight, and Clara felt the intensity of his gaze like a physical touch. Is that what you're doing, looking for reasons? I found one, she admitted. A place where my work matters, where I'm more than my father's bargaining chip. That's reason enough for now. For now, he repeated thoughtfully. And later, Clara didn't have an answer for that. The future stretched uncertain as always, but somehow less frightening than before. As they walked back to the house, Caleb asked, The Cowboys aren't giving you trouble, are they? Some of them are rough around the edges. No more than usual. Clara had indeed endured some crude comments and lingering looks, but nothing she couldn't handle. Though there was a man in town yesterday when Rosa and I went for supplies. He seemed very interested when he heard I worked here. Caleb stopped. What man? Tall, thin, with a scar across his nose. Said his name was Garrett. Kept asking questions about the ranch, about you. Caleb's expression darkened. Josiah Garrett. He rides with what's left of the Colson gang. They've been pushing boundaries lately, testing responses. The ones who... Clara couldn't finish the sentence. Some of them, yes, I dealt with the leaders. But men like Garrett slipped away. They know better than to come here directly, but... He frowned. I'll have Jake increase the patrols. And Clara, don't go to town without me or one of my men from now on. The protective edge in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her. I can take care of myself. I don't doubt it. But men like Garrett don't fight fair, especially with women. His jaw tightened. I won't have another woman hurt because of her connection to this ranch. Clara understood then that in Caleb's mind, she'd become part of what he protected. The responsibility clearly weighed on him, but she also sensed something else, a gradual awakening from the numbness of grief. That night, as she prepared for bed, Clara noticed a new addition to her room. A Winchester rifle leaned against the wall, with a box of ammunition on the dresser. Rosa says you know how to shoot, Caleb said from the doorway. This is loaded. Keep it close. You really think they'll come here? I think Garrett was scouting, seeing how things have changed. Men like him are vultures. They circle the wounded and wait for weakness. His eyes met hers. But they'll find none here. After he left, Clara checked the rifle, pleased to find it well maintained and easy to handle. She'd told the truth about knowing how to shoot. Her mother had insisted on it, saying a woman alone needed every advantage. As she lay in bed, Clara reflected on the day's revelations. The Double B Ranch was more than a workplace now. It was a place of ghosts and grief, but also of gradual healing. She'd come here running from one tragedy and found herself in the aftermath of another. But perhaps that was fitting. Perhaps broken people could help each other find wholeness again. The thought of Caleb's pain made her chest ache, but it also strengthened her resolve. She would not be another loss for him to carry. Whatever came, whether from men like Garrett or from the complicated feelings growing between her and her employer, she would face it with the courage her mother had taught her. In the distance, a wolf howled, and others answered. The predators were gathering, drawn by some scent of vulnerability, but Clara fell asleep with her hand on the rifle stock, ready to prove them wrong. The attack came at dusk, when the sky bled crimson and the ranch hands were scattered across the property finishing their day's work. Clara was in the office, updating the ledgers. When she heard the first gunshots crack through the evening air, she grabbed the Winchester, her heart hammering as she peered through the window. Riders were pouring through the main gate, at least a dozen men, firing wildly as they came. She recognized Garrett's scarred face among them, his mouth twisted in a savage grin. Clara Rosa burst through the door, her face pale. "The root cellar, quickly!" "Where's Caleb?" "In the north pasture with most of the men, these banditos. They waited until—" Glass shattered as bullets struck the window. Clara pushed Rosa down, covering the older woman with her body. "Go!" Clara hissed. "Get to the cellar!" "Not without you. Someone needs to hold them off until help comes." Clara checked the rifle's load, trying to keep her hands steady. "Go, Rosa, please!" The housekeeper's face crumpled, but she nodded and crawled toward the back door. Clara took position by the window, using the heavy desk as cover. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. "Breathe steady, squeeze gentle, make every shot count." She fired, watching one rider tumble from his saddle. The others scattered, seeking cover behind water troughs and fence posts. Clara's world narrowed to the simple rhythm of aim. Fire, reload. She'd managed to drop 2 more attackers when she heard boots on the porch. The door exploded inward. Garrett stood there, blood seeping from a graze on his cheek, his eyes wild with rage and something worse. Well, Boone's new pet. He advanced slowly, gun trained on her. "Where is he, girl?" "Gone to Mexico." Clara lied, trying to keep her voice steady. "Won't be back for weeks." Garrett backhanded her, sending her sprawling. The rifle skittered across the floor. "Try again. My scout saw him this morning." Clara tasted blood, her vision swimming, but beneath the fear, anger blazed. She was tired of men who thought violence was their birthright. "Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you." "Brave little thing." Garrett hauled her up by her hair. "Let's see how brave you are when—" The night erupted with thundering hooves and war cries. Caleb and his men swept into the yard like avenging demons, guns blazing. Garrett cursed, dragging Clara toward the door, using her as a shield. "Boone," he shouted, "I've got your woman." Through the chaos of gunfire and shouting, Clara saw Caleb wheel his horse around. Even in the fading light, she could see the deadly calm that settled over his features. "Let her go. Garrett, this is between us." "Everything was between us the moment you killed my brother." Garrett's arm tightened around Clara's throat. "Eye for an eye. Boone, you took my blood. I take yours." "Your brother murdered my family." "Your family was necessary. You were getting too powerful, too righteous. The territory was better when men like us made the rules, not men like you with your laws and fences and—" Clara felt Garrett's grip loosen slightly as he ranted. It was enough. She drove her elbow back hard into his ribs while stomping on his instep. As he doubled over, she twisted away. The gunshot was impossibly loud. Clara felt the bullet's wind as it passed her cheek. Then Garrett was falling, a spreading stain on his chest. Caleb sat his horse with smoking gun, his face carved from stone. The battle was turning. Caught between the ranch defenders and Caleb's returning crew, the attackers were falling back. Some fled into the darkness. Others lay still in the dust. Within minutes, it was over. Clara stood frozen, adrenaline making her shake. Then Caleb was there, off his horse and pulling her into his arms. She could feel his heart racing beneath the dust-covered shirt. "Are you hurt, did he?" "I'm all right," her voice came out breathless. "Just bruised." He pulled back, his hands cupping her face as he examined the mark Garrett had left. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. If he wasn't already dead. "Caleb." She caught his hands. "I'm all right. It's over." "No." His voice was rough. "It won't be over until every last one of them understands that this ranch and everyone on it is under my protection." Jake, the foreman, approached. 3 dead, 2 wounded and captured, the rest scattered like rats. "Want us to track them?" "At first light. Post double guards tonight." Caleb's arms tightened around Clara as if he'd just realized he was still holding her. He stepped back awkwardly. "See to the wounded. Our men first." As Jake moved off, Caleb turned back to Clara. "You held them off alone." "Just for a few minutes. She gestured helplessly at the scattered shells around the window. "I think I hit 3 of them." "You think?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Clara, you dropped them clean. Jake's already calling you Annie Oakley." "Despite everything." Clara felt a flutter of pride. Then Rosa appeared, fussing over both of them, and the moment passed in a whirlwind of activity. There were wounds to tend, damage to assess, bodies to deal with. It was near midnight when Clara finally made it to her room. She'd helped Rosa bandage the injured cowboys and prepare a meal for the exhausted defenders. Her dress was ruined, stained with blood and dirt, and her hands wouldn't stop trembling. A soft knock interrupted her attempts to unhook the damaged garment. "Clara, it's me." She opened the door to find Caleb standing there with a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. He'd cleaned up and changed, but exhaustion lined his face. "Thought you might need this," he said, lifting the bottle. "I know I do." They sat on the porch steps, not speaking at first, just letting the whiskey burn away the worst of the shakes. The night was peaceful now, as if the violence had never happened. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally. "I brought this to your door. Garrett came here because of me, because of what I did to his brother. His brother who murdered your family." Clara took another sip, feeling the warmth spread through her chest. "You're not responsible for other men's evil. Caleb, how many times do I have to tell you that?" "Until I believe it, I suppose." He stared out into the darkness. "When I saw him holding you, using you as a shield," his hand clenched around the glass. "For a moment, it was happening again. Another woman in danger because of me." But it wasn't the same. Clara turned to face him. "I'm not Elizabeth. I'm not helpless. I made my own choice to stand and fight." "I know." He met her eyes, and something electric passed between them. "That's what terrifies me." The air grew thick with unspoken words. Clara was acutely aware of his nearness, of the way the moonlight caught in his hair, of the controlled strength in his hands. She thought of those hands gentle on her face earlier, checking for injuries. "I should go," Caleb said roughly, starting to rise. "Please don't." The words escaped before Clara could stop them. When he looked at her in surprise, she flushed but continued. "I mean, I don't want to be alone just yet. The quiet makes me remember the sound of breaking glass, the feel of Garrett's arm around my throat." Caleb settled back down, closer this time. "Then we'll sit, as long as you need." They talked quietly as the hours passed, sharing stories of their pasts. Clara learned that Caleb had been wild in his youth, making his fortune through dangerous cattle drives and risky investments. Elizabeth had tamed him, he said, made him want to build something lasting. She'd have liked you, he said unexpectedly. She valued courage above all else, said it was the only virtue that made the others possible. Tell me about her, Clara said softly. Not how she died, how she lived. So he did, painting a picture of a woman who'd defied her wealthy father to marry a rough American cowboy, who'd learned to shoot and ride and brand cattle while still maintaining the grace of her upbringing, who'd sung Spanish lullabies to their son and kept books of poetry next to agricultural manuals. She sounds wonderful, Clara said when he finished. She was. Caleb was quiet for a moment. But she's gone, and lately, for the first time in 3 years, I can imagine a future that isn't just endurance. Clara's breath caught. Caleb? I know. He stood abruptly. I know it's too soon, too complicated. You work for me, depend on me for protection. I won't. I would never take advantage. Clara rose too, catching his hand before he could leave. You're not taking advantage. You're the first man who's ever seen me as more than property or burden. Do you know what that means to me? He turned back, his face a mix of hope and hesitation. Clara, I'm still broken. What happened tonight? It'll happen again. This territory is violent, and I've made enemies. You deserve better than a man who brings danger to your door. I deserve a man who'd ride through hell to protect me. Clara countered. Who respects my choices, who sees my strength, who makes me feel. She trailed off, suddenly shy. Feel what? His voice had gone deep, rough, safe, valued. She met his eyes, desired. The confession hung between them like a living thing. Then Caleb moved, slowly, giving her every chance to step back. His hand came up to cradle her face, thumb brushing over her cheekbone. You are all those things, he murmured. And more. God help me. Clara, you're making me want things I thought I'd buried with. Then want them, she whispered. It's not betraying the dead to choose life. He leaned down, and Clara stretched up, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and desperate all at once. It tasted of whiskey and promises, of sorrow transformed into something sweeter. When they parted, both were breathing hard. Clara, he said against her forehead. My brave, fierce Clara, what are we doing? Living, she answered. Just living? They stood there in the darkness, holding each other, while the ranch settled into sleep around them. Tomorrow would bring challenges, more attacks to defend against, society's judgment to face, their own complicated feelings to navigate. But for now, in this moment, they had survived. They had chosen each other, despite the ghosts and the dangers. Stay with me, Clara whispered, not quite believing her own boldness. Just to sleep? I don't want to wake up alone and remember. Shh. He stroked her hair. I'll stay. Nothing will touch you tonight. Later, as Clara dozed in the circle of his arms, both of them fully clothed and carefully proper, she thought about the twists of fate that had brought them together. Violence and loss had shaped them both, but perhaps that very brokenness had taught them to recognize something precious when they found it. I'll slow down after sunrise, Caleb had murmured. She understood now what those words would mean when the time came. Not haste, but a promise that darkness would pass, that there would be time for gentleness when the immediate dangers faded. For now, she was content to rest in his protective embrace, listening to his heartbeat, strong and steady. Outside, dawn was still hours away, but Clara could already feel its approach. The night of violence was ending, and with it, perhaps, the long night of their solitary griefs. The weeks following the attack brought an uneasy peace to the Double B Ranch. Caleb's men had tracked down several of the fleeing bandits, and word spread quickly through the territory that the ranch was not to be trifled with. But it was the changes within the ranch house that truly marked the passage of time. Clara and Caleb had settled into a careful dance of propriety and suppressed longing. During the day, they maintained appropriate distance. She worked on the books while he managed the ranch operations. But in the evenings, they often found themselves on the porch, talking until the stars wheeled overhead. Sometimes their hands would brush, or their eyes would meet and hold, and the air would crackle with unspoken desires. Rosa watched it all with knowing eyes and occasional muttered prayers in Spanish. It was a sweltering afternoon in late September when everything shifted again. Clara was in town with Rosa, purchasing supplies, when she noticed a familiar figure lounging against the mercantile wall. Her father. Ezra Thornton looked worse than when she'd left, thinner, dirtier, with the hollow eyes of a man who'd found the bottom of too many bottles. When he saw her, his face lit up with false paternal warmth. "Clara, my dear girl." He stumbled forward, and she could smell the whiskey from 3 feet away. "I've been looking everywhere for you." "Have you?" Clara kept her voice cold, her hand moving instinctively to the small pistol Caleb had insisted she carry to town. Now. No need for that tone." Ezra's eyes darted to Rosa, then back to Clara. "I'm your father. Surely you can spare a moment for family." "We have nothing to discuss." Clara turned to go, but Ezra grabbed her arm. "But we do see. I've been thinking. You landing that job with Boone. That was clever. Real clever. And now that you've gotten close to him, let go of me." Clara's voice carried enough ice to freeze the desert. We can work together. A rich man like that probably keeps money in the house. You could." The click of a hammer being cocked cut him off. Jake, the foreman, stood behind Ezra with his gun drawn. "The lady asked you to let go." Ezra released her arm, raising his hands. "No harm meant, just talking to my daughter." "Miss Clara." Jake's voice was respectful but firm. "Mister, Boone asked me to escort you ladies home when you're finished here." Clara had never been more grateful for Caleb's protective instincts. "We're finished. Thank you, Jake." As they loaded the wagon, Ezra called out desperately, "Clara, you can't just abandon your father. I raised you." She turned back one final time. "No, Ezra, you didn't raise me. You tolerated me until I had value to trade. We're done." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Rosa's comforting hand on Clara's arm, the only acknowledgement of what had happened. But Clara knew word would reach Caleb soon enough. Ranch hands gossiped worse than old women. She was right. That evening, she found Caleb waiting in the office, his expression thunderous. "Your father approached you in town." "Jake has a big mouth," Clara said, trying for lightness. "Jake did his job." Caleb rose, pacing to the window. "What did Ezra want?" Clara hesitated, then told him about her father's suggestion that she rob the ranch. Caleb's hands clenched into fists, and for a moment she saw the dangerous man who'd hunted his family's killers. "If he comes near you again." "He won't." Clara moved closer, drawn by the need to soothe his anger. "He's a coward. Now that he knows I have protection, he'll slink away to whatever hole he crawled out of." "You don't know that." Caleb turned to face her. "Desperate men do desperate things. And if he's been talking in the saloons, spreading word that you have influence here." Clara understood his fear. In a land where women were often seen as possessions, her position at the ranch could be misconstrued. "Then we deal with it, like we always do." "We?" Caleb's expression softened slightly. "When did we become a we?" "Clara." The question hung between them, loaded with meaning. Clara's heart raced as she considered her answer. "Maybe when you sat with me all night after the attack," she said quietly. "Or when you gave me work that mattered instead of just charity. Or maybe—" She took a breath, gathering courage. "Maybe when you looked at me and saw something worth protecting, worth valuing." "Clara," her name was almost a groan. You know what people think? A young woman, living here, working closely with me. Your reputation. My reputation was ruined the day my father tried to sell me to Big Jack Sullivan. Clara lifted her chin. I don't care what people say. You should care. But even as he protested, Caleb moved closer. You deserve a proper courtship, a respectable marriage, a life without shadows. I deserve a man who sees me truly. Clara's voice was fierce. Who treats me as an equal, who trusts me with responsibilities, who... She stopped, suddenly overwhelmed. Who what? Caleb was close enough now that she could see the gold flecks in his sage-green eyes. Who makes me feel alive, she whispered. For the first time in my life, truly alive. The last walls of propriety crumbled. Caleb pulled her against him, his kiss hungry and desperate. Clara responded with equal fervor, her hands tangling in his hair, trying to get closer, to merge into him completely. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Caleb rested his forehead against hers, his voice rough. This is madness. Maybe. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt. But it's our madness. He kissed her again, slower this time, with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. When he pulled back, his expression was determined. Marry me. Clara's breath caught. What? Marry me, he repeated. Not because of what people think, not to protect your reputation. Because I can't imagine another day without the right to call you mine. Because you've brought light back into this house, into my life. Because He stopped, swallowing hard. Because I love you. Clara May Thornton. God help me, I love you. Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks. Caleb, are you sure I'm not Elizabeth? I'm not refined or educated. You're you, he interrupted fiercely. Brave, intelligent, strong. You stood your ground against bandits and faced down your father. You've organized my chaos and charmed my staff. You're exactly who I want, who I need. Yes, the word burst from her. Yes, I'll marry you. He kissed her again, and this time there was promise in it. Commitment and passion intertwined. When Rosa found them sometime later, still embraced in the office, she threw up her hands and muttered something about it being about time. News of the engagement spread quickly through the ranch and into town. Most of the cowboys were pleased. Clara had earned their respect during the attack. But in town, reactions were mixed. Some saw it as a fairy tale, the poor girl saved by the rich rancher. Others whispered darker theories about what hold she must have over him. Clara ignored them all. Focused on the sudden whirlwind of preparations, Caleb insisted on doing things properly, which meant a real wedding dress ordered from Denver, a proper ceremony, a celebration for the whole ranch. It was during a fitting for her dress that the past intruded again. The seamstress, Mrs. Whitfield, was pinning the hem when she said conversationally, "It's nice to see Mr. Boone happy again, after what happened with Elizabeth and little Tommy." "You knew them?" Clara asked carefully. "Oh yes, dear, Elizabeth and I were friends. She had such plans for that boy. Used to talk about sending him east for education, making sure he knew both his heritages." Mrs. Whitfield's face was wistful. "She'd have liked you. I think you have the same steel in your spine." That evening, Clara found Caleb at the small cemetery. He stood between the graves, hat in hand, speaking quietly. She started to withdraw, but he sensed her presence. "I was telling them about you," he said simply. It felt necessary. Clara moved to stand beside him. "Do you think she'd approve?" "I think she'd be grateful." Caleb's voice was thoughtful. "Elizabeth believed in living fully. She wouldn't have wanted me to die with her." They stood in comfortable silence, hands linked as the sun set behind the mountains. It was a moment of grace, of old grief making space for new love. That night, as Clara prepared for bed, she found a package on her dresser. Inside was a delicate gold locket. She opened it to find two tiny photographs, Elizabeth and Tommy, their faces frozen in eternal happiness. The note in Caleb's handwriting read, "They are part of our story, but not our ending. Wear this on our wedding day, so all the love that has been and will be can be present. C." Clara pressed the locket to her heart, tears flowing freely. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There were still those who wished them ill, still the harsh realities of frontier life to face. But she had found something precious in this wild land, a love born of mutual respect and shared strength, a partnership that could weather any storm. Moving to the window, she gazed out at the vast prairie bathed in moonlight. Somewhere in the bunkhouse, a cowboy was playing a harmonica, the lonely melody drifting on the night air. But Clara no longer felt alone. She had found her place, her purpose, her person. The wedding was set for 2 weeks hence. Let the tongues wag. Let the challenges come. She and Caleb would face them together, building a future on the ashes of the past, proving that sometimes the greatest loves were forged in the crucible of loss and found in the most unexpected places. As she settled into bed, Clara touched the locket at her throat and smiled. Tomorrow she would rise with the sun and continue the work of living, of loving, of becoming the woman she was meant to be. The frontier had tested her and found her strong enough. Now it was time to claim her happiness with both hands and never let go. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, but by noon, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. Clara stood before the mirror in her room, adjusting the ivory silk dress that had arrived from Denver just 2 days prior. Rosa fussed with her hair, weaving small wildflowers into the elegant chignon. "You are beautiful, Nina," Rosa said softly, "like an angel." Clara touched the gold locket at her throat, drawing strength from it. "I'm nervous. Rosa, what if—" "No what-ifs today." Rosa turned her firmly to face the mirror. "You are strong. Senor Caleb is strong. Together, you are stronger. This is all that matters." A commotion in the yard drew them to the window. Clara's blood ran cold. At least 20 riders were approaching, and at their head rode Big Jack Sullivan, very much alive despite rumors to the contrary. Beside him, unmistakably, was Ezra. "Stay here," Rosa commanded. But Clara was already reaching for the Winchester. "No, this is my fight too." They descended to find Caleb already on the porch, Jake and the other ranch hands flanking him. The wedding guests, townspeople and neighboring ranchers, milled nervously in the decorated yard. Sullivan reined up just outside the gate, his piggy eyes taking in the wedding preparations with malicious glee. Well, seems we're just in time for the festivities." "State your business and leave, Sullivan." Caleb's voice was deadly calm. "My business," Sullivan gestured to Ezra. "This man says his daughter was taken from him unlawfully, coerced into an inappropriate arrangement. As a concerned citizen, I felt obligated to investigate." Clara pushed past Caleb, still in her wedding dress but carrying the rifle. "I left of my own free will. There's no coercion here except what you're attempting now." "Clara, my dear girl," Ezra whined. "You don't understand. Mr. Sullivan has offered to help us. You could come home. We could be a family again." "We were never a family." Clara's voice cut like a blade. "You tried to sell me to this man to cover your gambling debts. Now you're what? Trying to sell me again." Sullivan's face darkened. "I paid good money for you. Girl, your father's debt was cleared," Clara interrupted. "Or did you forget the $50 Mr. Boone paid you? That was for the old debt. Your father's acquired new ones." Sullivan's smile was oily. "Substantial ones. Of course, if you were to reconsider your situation, become more amenable to certain arrangements, we could work something out." The implications hung heavy in the air. Clara heard several wedding guests gasp, finally understanding the true nature of the confrontation. "How much?" Caleb asked quietly. Sullivan named a figure that made even hardened ranchers whistle. It was more than most men saw in 5 years. "However," Sullivan continued, "I'm a reasonable man. I'd consider the debt cleared if Miss Clara there agrees to revisit our original arrangement. Just for a few months. Understand? Then she'd be free to return to you, if you still wanted used goods." The yard erupted. Caleb surged forward, murder in his eyes. But Clara caught his arm. Several of the wedding guests, respectable women from town, moved to stand behind Clara in a surprising show of support. "You want to negotiate?" Clara's voice rang clear. "Then let's negotiate properly. You claim my father owes you money. Prove it." Sullivan gestured to one of his men, who produced a handful of IOUs. Clara examined them with the eye of someone who'd kept books for years. "These are forgeries," she announced. "The handwriting is similar but not identical. And the dates, several of these are from days I know for certain my father was passed out drunk in our shack because I was tending him." "You calling me a liar? Girl, I'm calling you a fraud and a criminal." Clara handed the papers back contemptuously. "And everyone here can see it." Sullivan's hand moved toward his gun, but stopped as he realized how many weapons were now trained on him. Not just from Caleb's men, but from several wedding guests. The territorial judge, invited as a witness, stepped forward. "Miss Thornton makes a valid point." Judge Harrison said, "These documents would need to be verified in court. Until then, there's no legal debt to discuss." "Legal," Sullivan spat. "Since when do we need lawyers and judges to settle man's business?" "Since we decided to build a civilization instead of a bandit's paradise," Caleb said. "This is 1878, not 1848. The law means something here." Sullivan's face contorted with rage. "You think you're better than me, Boone? You've spilled as much blood as any of us, and now you want to play respectable with your child bride." "I'm no child," Clara said firmly. "I'm a woman who's made her choice, and I choose to stand with the man who sees my worth beyond my body or my labor, who treats me as an equal, not property." "Pretty words," Sullivan sneered. "Let's see how equal you feel when—" He never finished the threat. Ezra, who'd been growing increasingly agitated, suddenly lunged for Sullivan's saddlebag. "You promised," he shrieked. "You said if I brought her, you'd clear my debts." In the struggle, a leather pouch fell open, spilling its contents. Among the coins and papers, several items gleamed in the afternoon sun jewelry. Distinctive pieces that Clara recognized with a shock. "That's Elizabeth Boone's wedding ring." "Mrs." Whitfield gasped. "I'd know it anywhere. I was there when Caleb placed it on her finger." The yard went deathly quiet. Caleb's face had gone white, then flushed with a rage so intense that even his own men stepped back. "You were there," he said, voice barely human. "The raid. You were with them." Sullivan tried to bluster. "Now, hold on." "She never took that ring off." Caleb's words were precise, each one a nail in Sullivan's coffin. "Which means you took it from her body." The confession, when it came, was almost anticlimactic. Faced with overwhelming evidence and surrounded by hostile witnesses, Sullivan broke. He'd been part of the Comanche raid, helping to plan it, sharing in the spoils. He'd kept Elizabeth's jewelry as trophies. What followed was swift frontier justice. Judge Harrison, his face grim, convened an impromptu court. With over 30 witnesses to Sullivan's confession, the verdict was inevitable. Sullivan and 3 of his men who'd participated in the raid were sentenced to hang. The rest, including Ezra, were given 24 hours to leave the territory. As Sullivan was led away, he turned back to Clara with poisonous hatred. "This ain't over, girl. You've made powerful enemies today." "Good," Clara replied steadily. "I'd rather have honest enemies than false friends." Ezra approached her one last time, pathetic in his desperation. "Clara, please, I'm your father. My father died the day he tried to sell me." Clara's voice was final. "The man before me is a stranger who shares my blood and nothing else. Goodbye, Ezra. Don't come back." As the unwanted visitors were escorted away, Clara felt Caleb's hand on her shoulder. She turned to find him looking at her with such pride and pain that her heart ached. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "On our wedding day?" "You gave me justice," he interrupted. "You gave me answers. You stood before the entire territory and claimed your right to choose your own path. How could I be anything but proud?" The wedding guests, who'd witnessed drama beyond their wildest expectations, burst into spontaneous applause. Judge Harrison stepped forward with a wry smile. "Well, I'm already here, and I believe we have a ceremony to perform." What followed was a wedding unlike any the territory had seen. The bride carried a rifle along with her bouquet. The groom's vows included promises to respect her strength as well as protect her. The guests were a mix of cowboys, ranchers, townspeople, and even some of the working girls from the saloons who'd come to see one of their own rise above her circumstances. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Clara and Caleb stood before Judge Harrison. The storm that had threatened all day held off, as if nature itself recognized the significance of the moment. "Do you, Clara May Thornton, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Judge Harrison asked. Clara looked at Caleb, seeing not just the man who'd saved her, but the partner who trusted her to save herself. "I do." "Do you, Caleb Samuel Boone, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Caleb's voice was strong and clear. "I do." "Then, by the power vested in me by the Wyoming Territory, I pronounce you husband and wife." As Caleb kissed his bride, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. Even Rosa was dabbing at her eyes with her apron. The celebration that followed was joyous, but tinged with the gravity of what had occurred. Justice had been served. Old wounds had been cleansed, and a new chapter was beginning for the Double B Ranch. As the evening progressed, Clara found a moment of quiet with her new husband. They stood apart from the dancers, watching their guests celebrate under the stars. "No regrets?" Caleb asked softly. Clara touched the locket at her throat, thinking of all that had brought them to this moment: loss, pain, fear, but also courage, hope, and love. "None," she said firmly. "We've earned this happiness, Caleb, both of us." He pulled her close, and they swayed together to the distant music. Around them, the ranch sprawled under the vast Wyoming sky, no longer a place of exile or sorrow, but a home built on truth and justice. "I love you, Mrs. Boone," Caleb murmured against her hair. "And I love you, Mr. Boone," Clara replied, meaning it with every fiber of her being. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Sullivan's death would create a power vacuum that others would try to fill. There would be those who resented Clara's rise, who challenged Caleb's methods. But tonight they had each other, and that was enough. As if reading her thoughts, Caleb whispered, "Whatever comes, we face it together." "Together," Clara agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted of freedom and forever. The first frost of autumn had just kissed the prairie grass when Clara realized she was with child. She stood at the window of the rebuilt kitchen, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach, watching Caleb work with a new colt in the corral. 3 months of marriage had brought a rhythm to their days, work and laughter, quiet evenings and passionate nights, the slow weaving together of 2 lives into one. But this news would change everything. Rosa found her there, took one look at her face, and nodded knowingly. "How long?" 2 months, I think." Clara turned from the window. "Rosa, what if—" "No." The older woman's voice was firm. "No fear, this house needs children again. It has been waiting." Clara knew Rosa was right, But she also knew the shadow that would fall across Caleb's face when she told him. The ghost of little Tommy still wandered these halls, especially on quiet Sunday mornings when the light fell just so across the empty nursery. She chose her moment carefully. After supper, when they sat before the fire in the parlor, Caleb was reading a letter from the Cattlemen's Association, frowning over some new regulation, when Clara gathered her courage. "I have something to tell you." He set the letter aside immediately, his attention fully on her. "What is it? Has someone been bothering you in town again?" "No, nothing like that." She took his hands, feeling them strong and calloused in hers. "Caleb, I'm going to have a baby." The color drained from his face. For a long moment, he sat frozen, and Clara could see the war playing out behind his eyes, joy battling terror, hope wrestling with memory. "Caleb," she said softly, "say something." He pulled his hands free and stood abruptly, moving to the fireplace. "When?" "Spring, April, Rosa thinks." His shoulders were rigid with tension. "I see." Clara rose too, hurt beginning to kindle into anger. "That's all you see? What do you want me to say?" He turned, and the raw fear in his eyes stopped her cold. "That I'm happy, that I'm not terrified, that I won't spend every moment until that child is grown watching for raiders, checking windows, posting guards." "Yes," Clara interrupted. "Yes, I want you to be happy. Our child deserves a father who greets their existence with joy, not fear." "Tommy had that." Caleb's voice broke. "Tommy had a father who thought love was enough to keep him safe. Look how that ended." The pain in his words doused Clara's anger. She moved to him, wrapping her arms around his rigid form. "This isn't 3 years ago. Sullivan's gang is broken. The territory is more settled. We have good men, strong defenses." Elizabeth had those things too. But his arms came around her, holding tight. "Clara, if I lost you, lost another child—" "You won't." She pulled back to meet his eyes. "We can't live in fear, Caleb. That's not living at all. Your son, our child, deserves better than that." Something shifted in his expression at her words. "Our child," he repeated wonderingly. Then, like a dam breaking, his composure crumbled. He pulled her close again, his face buried in her hair. "God help me, Clara, a baby. We're having a baby." "Yes," she whispered, feeling him tremble against her. "And he or she will be born into a home full of love, with parents who've learned that joy can exist alongside sorrow, that the future doesn't have to be held hostage by the past." They sank onto the settee together, Caleb's hand moving tentatively to rest on her stomach. "Do you think, can you feel—" "Not yet. Rosa says another month or two." Clara covered his hand with hers. "But they're there, growing, living—" "Living," Caleb echoed. And for the first time since she'd told him, a smile touched his lips. "When I saw you that day in Coyote Ridge, defying your father and Sullivan, I thought I was just preventing an injustice. I never imagined—" "What?" "That you'd resurrect me." He cupped her face gently. "That you'd make me want things I'd sworn off forever. A future, a family, hope." They sat together as the fire burned low, making tentative plans. The empty nursery would need to be prepared. Rosa would need help as Clara's condition advanced. Perhaps they could hire that young widow, Mary Patterson, who'd been taking in washing since her husband died in a mine collapse. Over the following weeks, the ranch community embraced the news with enthusiasm. The Cowboys took to treating Clara like spun glass, which amused her greatly. She was still the woman who'd held off bandits with a Winchester, but now they insisted on carrying anything heavier than a coffee pot. "I'm pregnant, not dying," she told Jake in exasperation when he tried to take a ledger from her hands. Mister," Boone said. "Mister, Boone can speak to Mrs. Boone himself if he has concerns." But she smiled to soften the words, their protectiveness while excessive, came from love. The first test came sooner than expected. Clara was in town with Mary Patterson, who had indeed joined the household staff when they encountered unexpected trouble. A group of men had ridden in, remnants of various gangs that Caleb's justice had scattered. They'd been drinking, working up their courage, and Clara's appearance seemed like a sign. Well, the high and mighty Mrs. Boone. The speaker was a rat-faced man named Henley who'd ridden with Garrett. Heard you were breeding. Boone work fast, don't he? Clara kept her voice level, one hand moving to the derringer in her pocket. Good afternoon, Mr. Henley. I believe Judge Harrison made it clear you weren't welcome in the territory. Judge ain't here. Henley stepped closer, his breath foul with whiskey. Just us. Maybe we should finish what Garrett started. Maybe you should think very carefully about your next move. The voice came from behind Clara. She turned to see three women stepping out of the millinery shop. Mrs. Whitfield, Judge Harrison's wife Eleanor, and surprisingly, Scarlett Jane, who ran the cleanest of the town's sporting houses. This ain't your business, ladies, Henley snarled. A pack of cowards threatening a pregnant woman. Scarlett Jane's painted lips curved in a dangerous smile. I'd say that's every woman's business. Boys. At her call, several men emerged from various storefronts. Not cowboys or lawmen, but townsfolk. The baker, the barber, two clerks from the bank, all armed, all looking decidedly unfriendly. Seems the town's got opinions about folks who threaten our own. Mrs. Whitfield said calmly, Mrs. Boone and her husband have done right by this community. We protect what's ours. Faced with unified opposition, Henley and his companions backed down, muttering threats as they slunk away. But the incident left Clara shaken, not from fear for herself, but from the realization of how much had changed. She was no longer an outsider, no longer just the girl Caleb Boone had rescued. She belonged here, was claimed by this rough community as one of their own. Thank you, she said, including all of them in her gaze. No thanks needed. Eleanor Harrison squeezed her arm. Though you might want to mention to that husband of yours that the town council's been discussing forming a proper militia. Might be time. When Clara told Caleb about the encounter that evening, his first instinct was predictable, to lock down, to surround her with guards. But she watched him fight that impulse, saw him remember their conversation about not living in fear. A militia's not a bad idea, he said finally. I'll speak to Judge Harrison. If we're building a future here, really building it, we need to think beyond just the ranch. It was a turning point. Over the following months, as Clara's belly grew round and the winter winds howled across the prairie, the Double B Ranch became the center of a growing alliance. Neighboring ranchers met regularly to discuss mutual defense. The town organized and trained. What had begun as one man's quest for justice evolved into a community's stand for civilization. Clara threw herself into the work, using her gift for numbers to help coordinate supplies and resources. She started a school in town, teaching reading and arithmetic to anyone who wanted to learn. Some of her students were cowboys who'd never held a pencil. Others were women from the sporting houses looking for different opportunities. You're building quite a legacy, Caleb told her one evening as she reviewed lesson plans. She was 7 months along now, moving with the careful grace of late pregnancy. We are, she corrected. This child will be born into a community, not just a ranch. They'll have neighbors, friends, a future that extends beyond these fences. He knelt beside her chair, hands spanning her belly, and was rewarded with a strong kick. The wonder on his face made her heart ache with love. Definitely your child, he said, already fighting. Our child, Clara said firmly. With your courage and my stubbornness, heaven help us all. That night, as they lay together in the big bed they'd shared since their wedding night, Caleb told her more about Tommy, how he'd loved horses and hated baths, How he'd followed the cowboys around, mimicking their bow-legged walk. How his favorite story had been about a prince who tamed dragons. "I want this child to know about their brother," he said into the darkness. "To know they're not replacing him, but adding to the love in this family." "They will," Clara promised. "We'll tell them stories, show them that love doesn't divide, it multiplies." As winter gave way to spring, the ranch prepared for new life. The nursery was painted and furnished. Rosa knitted enough blankets for triplets. The cowboys carved toys and practiced lullabies when they thought no one was listening. Clara continued her work until the very end, waddling between the office and the schoolhouse, refusing to be confined. She'd faced down bandits and her own father. She wasn't about to let pregnancy defeat her. But on a soft April morning, as dawn painted the sky rose and gold, she woke Caleb with a gentle shake. "It's time," she said simply. The fear flashed across his face again, but this time he mastered it quickly. "I'll get Rosa. Don't—" "Caleb." She caught his hand. "We're going to be fine. All of us. This is a beginning, not an ending." He kissed her fiercely. "You're the strongest woman I know. Clara Boone. Don't you dare prove me wrong." "Never," she promised, then gasped as another contraction rolled through her. "Now go and Caleb. No matter what you hear, stay close. This baby needs to know their father's voice from the very first moment." As he rushed to fetch help, Clara gripped the headboard and prepared for the battle ahead. Outside, the ranch was stirring to life, cowboys heading to the range, horses nickering for their morning feed, the endless rhythm of life on the frontier. Soon, very soon, a new voice would join that chorus, a child born not of tragedy but of triumph, not of fear but of hope. The Double B Ranch had been a place of endings. Now it would witness a beginning. The baby's cry pierced the April dawn, strong and clear as a bell. After 12 hours of labor, Clara collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but triumphant. Rosa placed the squalling bundle in her arms, tears streaming down the older woman's weathered face. "A daughter," Rosa announced, "healthy and perfect." Through the haze of exhaustion, Clara saw Caleb's face transform. The fear that had shadowed him for months melted away, replaced by wonder so pure it took her breath away. He reached out with trembling hands to touch the baby's downy head. "A daughter," he repeated in awe. "Clara, we have a daughter." "What shall we call her?" Clara asked, though they'd discussed names for months. Caleb's eyes met hers, full of understanding. "Grace Elizabeth Boone, for the grace that brought you to me, and for her." Clara nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. It was perfect, honoring the past while embracing the future. As word spread through the ranch, a celebration erupted. Cowboys who could rope a steer in 10 seconds flat stood awkwardly in the doorway, hats in hand, faces soft with emotion as they gazed at the tiny bundle. Jake presented a small wooden horse he'd been carving for months. Even the taciturn blacksmith, Hans, wept openly. "Never thought I'd see life in this house again," he said gruffly. "Does an old heart good." The weeks that followed were a blur of firsts. Grace's first smile gas, Rosa insisted, but Clara knew better. Her first grasp of Caleb's finger, the first time she slept through the night, allowing her exhausted parents a full rest. But the world beyond the ranch didn't pause for new life. Reports came of rustlers hitting neighboring spreads, of tensions rising between cattlemen and the new wave of homesteaders. The fragile peace they'd built was being tested. It was during Grace's baptism in town that the next challenge appeared. The small church was packed, the community gathering to celebrate this symbol of renewal. Judge Harrison had just blessed the baby when the church doors burst open. A young woman stood there, travel-worn and desperate. "Please," she gasped. "They're coming. My husband. They shot him. They're coming for the town." Chaos erupted as everyone recognized her. Sarah Dalton, wife of a homesteader who'd claimed land near the river, land that certain cattle interests had considered theirs by right of use, if not law. "How many?" Caleb demanded. "Already moving. 20, maybe more, led by a man named Briggs, they say." She swallowed hard. "They say they're cleaning out all the nesters in any town that harbors them." Samuel Briggs. Clara knew the name, a cattle baron from Texas who'd been pushing north, swallowing smaller operations, ruling through fear. He represented everything Caleb had fought against, everything their community stood to lose. "Get the women and children to the church basement." Judge Harrison ordered, "Men, arm yourselves. This is our home. We defend it." "No!" Clara's voice cut through the noise. She stood at the altar, Grace in her arms, looking every inch the frontierswoman she'd become. "We all defend it. Every person who can hold a gun. This isn't about men protecting women. It's about a community protecting itself." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some of the men looked scandalized, but the women ranchers' wives, townswomen, even the sporting house girls, straightened with purpose. "Clara's right," Scarlett Jane declared. "I didn't build my business by hiding in basements. My girls and I can shoot as well as any man." "The school children are my responsibility," Mary Patterson added. "But once they're safe, I'll take my place on the line." And so it was decided. Within an hour, Coyote Ridge transformed into a fortress. Windows became gun ports. Rooftops sprouted riflemen and women. The main street, usually bustling with commerce, fell eerily silent. Clara took her position in the church bell tower, the best vantage point in town. Grace was safe below with Rosa and the youngest children. Caleb commanded the main defensive line, his experience evident in how quickly he organized the town's defenders. They didn't have long to wait. Briggs and his men appeared on the horizon, riding in formation like some dark army. At their head, Briggs himself, a massive man with cold eyes and a reputation for brutality. "So, people of Coyote Ridge," he called out as they stopped just outside effective rifle range. "We've got no quarrel with you. Just hand over any nesters you're hiding, and we'll move on peaceful-like." Judge Harrison, standing on the courthouse steps, replied firmly, "These people are citizens, legally entitled to their claims. You have no authority here. Briggs." "Authority," Briggs laughed. "Out here, guns make authority, and we've got more guns." "Do you?" Caleb stepped into view, and Clara's heart swelled with pride. "Count again. Briggs, every window, every rooftop. This isn't some helpless settlement. This is our home." For the first time, Briggs seemed to notice the bristling defenses. His confidence wavered slightly. "You'd risk your town for a bunch of dirt farmers. We risk our town if we don't stand for what's right." Eleanor Harrison called out from her position. "Today it's homesteaders. Tomorrow it might be any of us who doesn't bow to your will." The standoff stretched taut. Clara sighted down her rifle, picking out Briggs in her crosshairs. One shot could end it, but that would make them no better than the men they opposed. Then, unexpectedly, help arrived. Dust clouds on 3 horizons announced riders approaching fast. The neighboring ranchers, alerted by a system of signal fires, converged on the town. Not just the big operators, but smaller outfits too. And, surprisingly, a group of homesteaders, armed with whatever they could find. "Looks like you miscounted too, Briggs," Caleb called out as over 100 defenders surrounded the would-be attackers. "This territory stands together." Faced with overwhelming opposition and no easy victory, Briggs made the only choice he could. "This ain't over," he snarled. The law is what we make it." Judge Harrison interrupted. "And we've made ours clear. Move on, Briggs. Don't come back." As the defeated raiders rode away, the town erupted in celebration. But for Clara, watching from the tower, the real victory wasn't in the guns or the numbers. It was in the homesteader wives embracing the ranchers' women, in the way Scarlett Jane's girls were welcomed into the church for the first time, in how former enemies stood shoulder to shoulder. That evening, as the town celebrated with an impromptu festival, Clara found herself back in the church with Grace. The baby fussed, hungry after the day's excitement, and Clara settled into a pew to nurse her. "She slept through it all," Caleb said, sliding in beside them. "Her first battle, and she slept." "Because she felt safe," Clara replied. "Because she's growing up in a place where people stand together, where right matters more than might." He wrapped an arm around them both, his voice thoughtful. "It's not the world I expected to give my children. When I thought darkness had won forever. But it didn't." Clara looked through the window at the celebration outside. Cowboys dancing with shopgirls, homesteaders sharing drinks with cattlemen, children of all backgrounds playing together. We chose light, over and over, in small ways and large. We chose light. Grace finished nursing and gazed up at them with eyes that were already showing hints of Caleb's sage green. Clara imagined the stories they'd tell her someday, of how her parents met, of the brother she never knew but who was part of their family's story, of the day a town stood together and chose civilization over chaos. "What are you thinking?" Caleb asked. "About the future. Her future." Clara smiled. "She'll grow up in a world we're building with our own hands. Not perfect, but better. A place where a woman can own land, run a business, stand equal with men, where justice means something more than who has the fastest gun. Think we'll live to see it." "We're seeing it now." Clara gestured toward the window. "Every day we choose to be better than our fears. We're building it." As if in agreement, Grace cooed and reached for her father's face. Caleb caught her tiny hand, his expression soft with love. "Then we'd better get back to work," he said. "Building that future sounds like a big job." "Good thing we're not doing it alone," Clara replied. They sat together in the peaceful church as twilight settled over the town. Outside, the celebration continued, a community forged in conflict but sustained by hope. The Double B Ranch had brought them together, but what they'd built transcended any single family or fortune. 2 years later, Clara stood in that same church for a very different ceremony. Grace toddled between the pews, chased by several other children, including the newest addition to the Boone family, Thomas Caleb, born on a peaceful winter morning with none of the drama that had attended his sister's arrival. The occasion was the dedication of the new school building, funded jointly by the Cattlemen's Association and the Homesteaders Alliance. Clara had been elected to run it, the first woman to hold such a position in the territory. "Education is the true equalizer," she said in her dedication speech, Grace clinging to her skirts while Caleb held baby Thomas. "Not guns, not force, but knowledge, the ability to read, write, and reason, to understand our rights and responsibilities, to build rather than tear down." The crowd, ranchers and farmers, townspeople and cowboys, women from all walks of life, applauded enthusiastically. In the front row, Rosa wiped away tears, muttering about dust in her eyes. After the ceremony, as people toured the new building, Judge Harrison approached the Boones. "Heard from the territorial governor," he said quietly. "He's impressed with what we've accomplished here. Wants to use Coyote Ridge as a model for other towns." "Lord help them," Caleb said dryly, making Clara laugh. "I'm serious," the judge continued. "What we've built here, cooperation instead of conflict, law instead of vengeance, opportunity regardless of birth or gender, it matters. It's the future of the West." That evening, Clara and Caleb walked their land, children in arms, watching the sun set over the vast prairie. The Double B had prospered, but more importantly, it had become the heart of something larger, a community that proved civilization could flourish even in the wildest places. "No regrets?" Caleb asked, echoing his question from their wedding night. Clara thought of all that had brought them to this moment, the fear and violence, loss and redemption. the slow building of trust and love and hope. She looked at their children, at the man beside her who'd transformed from isolated grief to engaged partnership, at the thriving ranch that had risen from ashes. "Only one," she said. He looked at her in surprise. "What?" "That we can't do it all over again tomorrow." She smiled at his expression. "Every day with you, building this life, has been an adventure worth having. I'm greedy enough to want more." He kissed her then, with Grace giggling between them and Thomas gurgling happily. "Then we'd better make the most of the days we have," he murmured. As they headed back to the house, Clara paused to look back at the land stretching endlessly under the evening sky. Once, this vastness had frightened her. Now it felt like promise, all that space to grow, to build, to become. "Mama, stars," Grace pointed upward, her vocabulary expanding daily. "Yes, sweetheart, stars." Clara lifted her daughter higher, "Each one a light in the darkness, just like us." The Double B Ranch stood strong against the prairie wind, its windows glowing warm in the gathering dusk. Inside, Rosa would be preparing supper. Jake would be tallying the day's work. Mary would be setting the table, a family not of blood but of choice. Proof that broken people could build wholeness together. Clara Boone, once a desperate girl with 3 bullets and nowhere to run, now stood at the center of a life she'd helped create. The West had tested her and found her strong enough. Love had challenged her and found her brave enough. And in the end, she'd discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures came not from running away, but from having the courage to stay and build something worth keeping. Under the vast Wyoming sky, with her family around her and her community thriving, Clara looked toward tomorrow with anticipation. There would be challenges. There always were on the frontier. But there would also be joy, purpose, and the continuing work of civilization. She'd chosen her forever, and it had chosen her back. The frontier was still wild, but it was theirs. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Caleb's journey touched your heart as much as it touched mine. Where are you listening to this story from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world these tales of the American frontier are reaching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these passionate tales of love and adventure in the Old West. Your support means everything, and it helps me continue bringing you these stories of courage, redemption, and romance under the vast frontier skies. Until next time, partners.